Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our ASL lecture series presentation, hosted by the ASL program in the Department of Linguistics. Before we begin, we have a few announcements. First, I would like to thank the Department of Linguistics for their support in making these presentations possible. Thank you also to the interpreters for your preparation ahead of time. I also just wanted to make an announcement about adjusting your view. And so you can adjust your screen to see. So if it's hard for you to see and the videos are too small, what you can do is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, click View, Side-by-Side Speaker Mode. And that way you'll see one large video of the presenter. There is a little hatch mark in the middle of your screen that you can click and drag in order to make the left and right sides of your screen larger or smaller as you prefer. Once the presentation is completed, we're going to have about a half hour left for Q&A. You can type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Or if you would rather ask your question in American Sign Language, use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen in order to be called on, and then your video will be brought up so that you can ask your question. If you're planning to use spoken English, please wait a moment or two so we can bring the sign language interpreters up on the screen and communication will be facilitated that way. Okay. I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Tawny Holmes-Liebach. She's the Language Policy Counsel at Gallaudet University, along with being Associate Professor in the Department of Deaf Studies. She graduated from the University of Baltimore Law School with a focus on family mediation and law certification. She also has her Master of Arts in Family-Centered Early Education from Gallaudet University. She is a well-known presenter on local, state, national, and global levels when it comes to sign language access, rights, and advocacy for deaf children and adults. Her presentations are based on her legal knowledge and vision building off her rich experience working as the Education Policy Counsel at the National Association of the Deaf for the past 8 years, which took her to multiple corners of deaf communities with a wide variety of children, families, and professionals. Tonight, she is here to present the juxtaposition of sign language policy, which will provide both a quantitative and qualitative perspective on the current status of sign languages in the world. Please help me welcome Tawny Holmes-Liebach.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher, for that lovely introduction. And hello to everybody out there. I'm just thrilled to be here and to talk about this topic that's very near and dear to my heart as a deaf person, as an advocate as well. I'm always happy to share my thoughts on this stimulating topic with the greater community, talk about these topics together. These topics should not be limited to smaller groups. We want many, many perspectives, lots of eyeballs on these conversations. So with that, I'm very happy to go ahead and get started. I hope you can see the term on the PowerPoint slide, juxtaposition. We don't have a standardized sign for juxtaposition, so tonight I'm going to share this sign with you, the sign that I'll be using to demonstrate many areas of conflict. This will work in my context for my discussion tonight about the many conflicts as we talk about sign language internationally as well as domestically. I'm going to walk through a variety of topics with you today. I'm going to share some statistics with you as well. I'm going to share a variety of points of view and theoretical frameworks. I think that there is an area that we really need to focus on within our community. But at the end of my comments, I'm going to talk with you about next steps. possibly on the university level, the community level, the school level, organizational level, regardless of who you are, what those next steps might be. I know that there are hearing, deaf and hard of hearing people in this audience. This will be relevant to everyone is here tonight. When you see sign language, you're going to understand the high stakes of the situation and why this is so near and dear to our hearts and a core part of our thinking as we move forward and try to understand and work better to create equitability for deaf people, specifically deaf people who use sign language. Okay, let's dive in. So I've already talked to you about juxtaposition. Let's move on and see how that applies to ASL. This is the definition for the term juxtaposition. You can see the definition that we have something there, but it can appear and be used in a very different context. Something might be used to fill a space in a very different way. And we are going to compare the differences and take a look at how this word is used, how it can have sometimes shocking effects, especially when artists represent these terms. We will use this concept to show specifically how ASL and other sign languages. We might look at them as beautiful languages, and they are taking off in some areas, but in other areas, very important areas, they are not taking off, which can be very dangerous. Both of these things are happening at the same time. That's how things are today in society. And we're going to talk a little further about how on one hand, things can be going beautifully, really launching in terms of ASL and the way it's being represented and accepted, and then who really has access to it to get a truly global picture of the juxtaposition of how ASL is being used. We're going to talk about advocates, how we are pushing language policy, language recognition, and to see both being held at the same time, both sides of that book at the same time. So that is the goal this evening, to be able to hold both sides of this juxtaposition, different points of view, different narratives. Here's an example. Now this is referring to here in the United States, 2016, there was a review of each state and which states recognized ASL as a language. There are several sources that comprise this map. Some were self-sources, there were other supportive organizations that collected this data, but specifically which states at this time, there were only 5 that did not recognize ASL as a language. There is a caveat to that, however. On a state level, a legal level, they might be recognized, but context was very important that it was actually looked at as a foreign language or as an international language that would truly actually benefit hearing students at the time, hearing people who wanted to learn sign language as a second language. They were the ones receiving credit. Now, of course, there were some deaf students who also were interested in taking ASL courses and did have some benefit. They weren't as warmly welcome, but they were able to take ASL as a class. Of course, we also had codas who were also able to benefit from that. But of course, that's a small number of our population. Primarily, mostly, it was hearing people who were taking advantage of this recognition. And the law was making it possible for hearing people to take ASL as a foreign or world language, which is great, which is wonderful. The more signers, the better. We want more signers on Earth, more accessibility, more advocacy. When you go into stores and restaurants, if somebody knows a little bit of sign language, that only helps us. That's great. Even if they're a little uncomfortable, that can really be wonderful. Sometimes they're a teacher for the deaf. Sometimes they don't have any context in our world, but that's okay. In a very small town in Virginia last Saturday or last Sunday, I think it was, I was in a small town. And from the census, it looked like there were 632 people living in this particular town. But to my surprise, I was sitting and having dinner and somebody approached me. I thought it was my server, but it was somebody else who worked at the restaurant, came up and said, "Hey, are you deaf?" And of course I replied that I was. And they said, "You know, I know a little bit of sign language." And that was wonderful. And my husband asked, "Well, how did you learn sign?" And we were very positive It was a very good experience. And after dinner, I went back up and asked that person about how they learned. They asked me to slow my signing down, which I accommodated for. But we did have a conversation, and they said, well, a long time ago, I took a class. And I thought, right, there it is, right? That was really most of our conversation, and that was wonderful. We certainly want to keep that opportunity for hearing people intact. I know that there are a couple of states out there that specifically recognize ASL as a language for the deaf, specifically for deaf children, something that we certainly want to see, but there were only 3 states. The majority did not. So this is the map as it looked in 2016, with only 5 not recognizing and 45 states actually recognizing ASL as a world language. So here we move forward in time to 2019. Taking a look at the map now, we can see that 100% of the map fully recognize each state has laws in place to recognize ASL as a language. Now, strongly, context again is important because it's recognized as a world language, but 100% of states, if I remember, it was 49 were in the legislative process, were in the process to pass the law to recognize it as a state. But still, those numbers are tremendous. However, on the federal level, ASL has not been recognized as a language, and we still need to do quite a lot of advocacy in that area, but it's interesting how the laws tell a story, don't they? So this will give you the larger context of the struggle for ASL in greater society. Truly, it's already in place on a state level. Context, again, talking about L2 and world languages, our understandings are in place on a state level.
So within the last 10 years, from about 2011 until this last year, we've seen 3 different groups that we've studied a little bit. And they're each marked with a different color on this graph. The first group in red represents parents and family members. So that focuses on statistics of parents and family members. The yellow group signifies deaf students, and the green group represents hearing students. So from birth until school age and then college, you see the percentages of ASL use change over the years. So when a parent has a child that's born deaf, about 15% of those parents start learning sign language. And this could mean deaf parents or hearing parents. It doesn't specify which group, it just includes all parents. Then by the time the child enters school age, about 28% of parents know sign language. Then by the time the child is college age, there aren't real exact statistics, but it seems that the number remains pretty much the same percentage-wise. Now with the yellow group, which represents deaf students, we see some similarities. About 15% of deaf babies when they are born are exposed to sign language and services as well as other resources. Once they hit school age, statistics show that 55% of those students know sign language. And that number increases slightly when they enter college. But it's not a significant jump. Moving on to the green sector, which represents hearing students. From birth, some students are exposed to baby signs and numbers. So about 20% of hearing babies have the opportunity to use some form of sign language production, whether it be from books or classes or baby signs. The trend has become very popular for babies to learn sign language, whether or not they have deaf parents. Then when they enter school, during their K through 12 time, approximately the same number of hearing students know sign language. At that point, at about 50%, there's more of an opportunity for them to take a class or two, learning a little bit of basic sign language. But then once they enter college, you can see that the number of college students who have access to learn American Sign Language within the college environment jumps exponentially to 120%. ASL is the 3rd most taught language in the United States, other than English. And so that makes ASL number 4. First is Spanish, then comes French. Trying to remember the third one. It's English, and English, Spanish, French, and then ASL is the 4th most widely used language. So that means there are 1 million culturally deaf adults within the country. And so the statistic shows that about 48 million deaf and hard of hearing adults experiencing a range of hearing losses, whether they were born deaf or became late deafened or have a slight hearing loss. There are about 48 million people with a hearing loss within the United States, which means there are about 1 million culturally deaf people based on the numbers that we have. So we need to revisit that again. But today, millennials deaf millennials don't seem to be using video phone as much as they were previously. So we have to look at our numbers again to see exactly what they are. But as far as cultural deafness, this means deaf people who are using sign language and who interact and are engaged with the deaf community. That's how we define that. So it's very interesting how hearing students are very highly encouraged to learn sign language. And that is aligned with state laws as well. There are more opportunities for interpreters. There are a lot of pros to learning ASL language as well as spoken language. It's visual, it's very hands-on. It's a way to learn about a new culture, about a new community, which is pretty great. And of course, that's something we want to emphasize. At the same time, our concern lies with families of deaf children. Sign language may occur to them because there are deaf people on Earth. But as far what does their future then look like if the numbers continue this way, where deaf children are not getting the same exposure to the language as hearing students are? That's the juxtaposition we're focusing on here. And we need to look at it further. Now we've discussed state laws and trends that we've seen with sign language use. Now, what about federal law? Where does that come in? Is there more enforcement? Are there more rights? What is it that we need to go through society? State laws emphasize more individual choice for people who want to learn sign language. So if there are families who want to learn sign language, that's an option for them. That's something the system can offer. However, on the federal level, is sign language required? I'm going to show you a few laws that have some relevance, but they may not quite be there yet. Here you can see 4 different laws. In 1973, we have the Rehab Act, Section 504, which talks about providing communication access. Then in 1975, 2 years later, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, was passed. In that law, they refer to meaningful access. And that really wasn't fleshed out in terms of what that looks like for deaf and hard of hearing people. So when parents are struggling and trying to figure out what to do for their deaf or hard of hearing child or child who has a hearing loss, that doesn't automatically include things like captioning or other resources that the family may need. And families had to fight very hard to get certain things that they needed within the educational system for their children. So that in 1990 came the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, which was very strong. However, it did not directly recognize sign language. It mentions effective communication. So what is effective communication? It gave some examples like sign language interpreters, but and captioning, but not a clear definition about rights of communication through sign language or rights of language access. So stronger legislation was needed to meet those expectations so that deaf children could have equal access to education as their peers, and language as well. So that law is actually being used more than the IDEA law is. We see these improvements being made over the decades. Then in the year 2000, there came the Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Act, or EDI. Now, EDDI has an interesting history. When passed, it emphasized the deficiency model. It emphasized hearing loss, hearing impairment in babies. Now, we're very thankful for the reauthorization process, which means that the US Congress periodically needs to review some legislation and then makes adjustments to expectations in the reauthorization, including those different details of the time. So they may do it every 5 years, every 10 years. And that's where you will see notable reauthorizations. So in 1990 and the period going forward, you see a reauthorization of the ADA, for example, in 2004, the IDEA in 2010, and then EDDI again in 2017. Now in 2017, the community really stepped up with national agencies like the National Association of the Deaf, where I used to work. They lobbied hard to the US Congress to make adjustments in the terminology used within the law and who it recognizes and the needs of deaf babies and families. The law currently states that every state must create a deaf mentor program. The law also states deaf professionals must be included as well, but that's basically the same thing. It also stipulates that every state must provide linguistic resources, both visual and in spoken modalities. Therefore, that means the state must make sure that they are providing services both in spoken-based language as well as in signed language. Now, in April of 2020, it took effect. So the law basically has to have a plan created and funding for the new law to then take effect, and then the federal government will allocate funds and oversee it for a period of 4 years until a final report can be created and they see that all of the objectives have been met for use of that funding. And there are a few other stipulations within the law as well, but I won't get into that much detail about it. I should also add, the Center of Disease Control needs to collect data for EDDI. They're required to conduct research on a state level basis for deaf children and their language progression to make sure that they're hitting the appropriate milestones. And this also needs to happen on a national level. Hasn't happened yet, but it should soon. So we really need to lobby the government for that. That's just to give you an idea or an encapsulation of the federal laws that we have currently, which are on a different scale. Now, what about it? International level? The United States is not the only country in the world where deaf people live. They're all over the world using their home country's sign languages. So what do we know on an international level about these other countries? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about that. There was a very important UN treaty. In 2008, countries were encouraged to sign this treaty and also get it ratified. And I'd like to talk to you about the difference between signing versus ratification. So for signing, an emperor, a king, a president, the head of a nation, a prime minister can sign this treaty endorsing it, saying that their country will commit to this particular goal. Whereas ratification means that it depends on the governance system of each country, but basically their legislative body who is responsible for ratification will also endorse it. So a country could both sign and endorse a treaty, which would make it more effective. It gives it more teeth so that systems and laws within that country can change to match the ultimate goal stipulated within the treaty. And a treaty is also referred to as a convention. So we have the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which we refer to as CRPD. And this particular treaty focuses on people with disabilities in a cultural way. It focuses on their linguistic modalities and milestones, providing support to linguistic access and recognizing those languages. They've named the languages 7 times. It includes deaf children who sign, or deaf parents who have their own respective cultures, their own respective languages. There's really great language within that treaty. It's not a law per se, but it is a promise of that country who signs it that they will recognize this process, and they are committed to it. So once the UN passed it, the World Federation of the Deaf, or WFD, akin to what the UN did, they created their own organizations that people could connect to that then would be affiliated with the UN CRPD. And it has a large involvement of the deaf population from a variety of countries who are knowledgeable about the topic and who have been working in the field, just like what we have here in the United States with the NAD. So the NAD has joined the WFD, which then is affiliated with the UN. I don't know if you've noticed yet, but the United States is one of the few countries who has not yet ratified the CRPD. It was signed by President Obama. However, it still needs US Congress to ratify it. There have been 2 attempts, but both times it just barely missed the vote. I think one time it was defeated by 3 votes, unfortunately, so it couldn't get ratified. But hopefully the process will continue and we can get it ratified.
It's a wonderful opportunity to elevate our language for deaf people in general, to include the education for deaf people. It has very, very specific outcomes. And mixed applications, which I'll share with you in the next slide. So the CRPD, in its vision, asked each country to sign on with their promise and recognize deaf people and their languages. And several of those languages have been recognized successfully. But I would say out of, let's see, there's 180 countries out of 200 have signed on. Only about 40 of them it is growing quickly, those numbers. There's about 400 plus, I would say at this time, are recognizing signed languages in their native countries, 40 plus. But we need to do better. We need to work harder. We need to continue with our friends and advocates to continue to push throughout the world to really press on those governments, remind them of their commitments and their promises to make sign language a recognized language. Looking at this map that I'm sharing with you, it's an illustration that was used primarily for something else, but it does fit what I'm talking about. So you can see those 40 plus countries and where they're located. Many, many of them are in Europe that strongly recognize sign languages. Although we see a lot of schools for the deaf that have closed in those European countries. We are seeing some increases. We look over at Asia and we recognize that in Korea and Japan, many also have signed on to the ratification. India as well, South America. But when we look at North America, only Canada signed on and ratified. Just Canada in the North America area. But we have to keep an eye on those other countries that have not yet signed on compared to the rest of the world, are not moving forward to recognize sign language. There are 4 different types of language recognition according to the World Federation for the Deaf that exist under disability. There is culture, and then there are several languages, a variety of different languages and different applications. But what's important is that the language itself be recognized, and this is a good place to begin. So this gives you a better idea globally of where we are. So this is the greater point. Sign language recognition, access for deaf people is excellent when we're looking at public health and employment opportunities in the greater society and even just enjoyment. having access to government and having access to the greater world. These things have gotten better. Language access and ASL recognition has gotten better, but let's take a few steps back about what's happening in terms of populism. It comes back to our babies or our population. This comic was made about 15 years ago, but it really rings true still today. Take a look. It's the system. It's the system still not encouraging deaf babies to sign, even though at the same time we see this tremendous energy and focus on the benefits for hearing children, seeing that they act out less, that they have less behaviors, that they have greater access to language for hearing children. Was studies from Gallaudet University looking at L2 learners in the lab have continued to show a variety of benefits to American Sign Language. Even though that we continue to say, what a wonderful benefit is it to hearing people, it is not being demonstrated for deaf people. Even though we have all of the research showing that deaf children who don't have exposure to sign language later demonstrate all sorts of issues with language and brain development, that early exposure, early access to language context is very, very important for that brain development. And so as a result, if you talk to a deaf child and you ask a deaf child a question, they have to process the question. They might appear not to recognize what you're asking because they have to work doubly hard to figure out, where did I put that file in my brain? Because the brain needs to go around and around to access the file, to retrieve the information, and cannot answer as quickly as hearing children who've had access to language from birth or access to signed language. They haven't had those same language acquisition opportunities to feed the brain, to prime the brain. And that's why we see those delays. That is up until the age of 5. That language processing center, its location in the brain, its access to information, it would apply the same to hearing children as well. Children who are learning sign language at a young age have these great benefits, that brain development. That is. This is a particular Dr. Laura Petito is the director of VL2. And she is showing the effects of access to sign language and the application to babies and families. And that is something we need to keep an eye on. There isn't any evidence to say that young children should not have access to sign language. We have all sorts of technologies for amplification, but they still would continue to have positive results with access to language, even with their amplification. So this is something we really need to fix. We need to lift up as a society and really free our children and our community to access the benefits of American Sign Language the same way that their hearing peers have access. So we're looking worldwide. Worldwide, 92% of deaf and hard of hearing learners do not have access to their education in American Sign Language or in their native sign languages. And this continued, this was cited, but it continues to be true today. This is an area where we have to give a lot more thought. This is true in the United States as well. We have statistics that will show the National Center for Education, their statistics in the US Department of Education will show that about 400,000 deaf and hard of hearing children from 2018 around the United States, about 77,000 currently have IEPs. The rest do not. And for a variety of reasons. We have ADA, we have Section 504, some of them might not need it, but for a variety of reasons, some or some will not. Maybe they don't know their rights. There are a lot of reasons. So we have this core of students who have IEPs in their educational settings. Now, the percent of those in deaf schools is 8, not 80, 8%. It used to be 11.6%, and now it's a 1-digit number, 8%. And that has been a dramatic change. And you can see the impact. The impact is that 92% of our students might not have access to sign language or very limited access. They may have interpreters, they may not have interpreters. They might have teachers of the deaf who come in a couple of minutes per week, and that's about it. They might not have ever met other deaf adults. They might not have other deaf peers. That's a real area of concern. Gallaudet recently, if you'll see, have been accepting many, many more signers or new signers. Some students, not until the age of 20, have access to sign language and then start to acquire it as quickly as they can. Then they find themselves at Gallaudet with additional supports and hopefully a great sense of welcome to the university, a welcome to the community. We always welcome them, regardless of age, where they're from, where they are in their journey, any choices they've made about their identity, regardless of the systems they come through. They are always welcome to Gallaudet University. We need all of them. We need all of us. We need to validate and appreciate each other. So I'm going to move on from statistics to a theoretical point of view, specifically about language deprivation and that term. When we talk about systems, this is not about blaming individuals. I don't want to waste time pointing at people. We're really going to focus on systems.
Implicit bias.
And implicit bias. Any concepts in these systems that would infer that English is somehow better than sign language or other languages. Here you see two different mirrors, and on the left mirror, you'll see a circle where two fingers are trying to meet but are not able to touch. And that is showing how deaf people have less access. It's a medical model. It's an audiological model about trying to fix deaf people, viewing deafness as something broken that needs to be fixed, as focusing only on the ears. That is one model. And then on the other side of that mirror, it's how deaf people often see themselves, as just fine, able to meet, able to make connections as human, just proud of who they are as a person, bringing a culture with them, interacting with other deaf people and being just fine about who they are as a deaf person. And this would also include a variety of benefits. Being deaf brings all kinds of benefits to show us a broader view of the world, having peripheral vision, being able to use our peripheral vision, being able to read quicker, picking up on terms quicker, visual things, being able to sign underwater, using our language, which is three-dimensional. They're tremendously able to describe things and demonstrate things and show things in space and in the air because of our language. The use of classifiers, colors and shapes, textures can all be conveyed, speed, all at the same time in just a few signs. That's the benefit and the beauty of sign language. I demonstrated here all of the different pieces of language in one simple sign using a classifier, whether the road is jumpy or whether the road is smooth, or whether we're moving quickly or whether we're moving slowly, or what is the shape, what is the size of the vehicle. All this range of language can be demonstrated so quickly, so easily in ASL, a great benefit. English has its own benefits. All languages have their own benefits.
Time magazine.
In Time magazine, I'm trying to remember what the year was. It was 2018. They were talking about
Monolingualism
monolingualism
as the new illiteracy.
as the new illiteracy. And that it wasn't that most people in the world spoke 1, 2, or 3 different languages. It's only in the United States that only in high school is when many of our students, sometimes in middle school, have access to second and third languages. But generally, it's not until high school that many of our students don't have that access. And by then, the brain is no longer agile enough to really pick up those second and third languages. It's not easy to learn later in life. It's much easier at 2 or 3 years old. You'll see many, many children out there with access and are able to code switch between 2, 3, and 4, many different languages, because at that young age is when that brain is ready and facile enough to learn 2 and 3 different languages, to be able to use language to describe things, and the great benefits of being multilingual, in my view. So we really need to celebrate that. Having more than one language is something to be cultivated and celebrated. That's a comparison between a negative and a positive model. Which mirror do you want to look into? Which mirror do you see yourself in? Which mirror are you drawn to? One person might look in the mirror, see something very different than another person might look into, whether you see a positive or a negative reflection, really based on all the input that we are told, all the things that we see in our world, sometimes involving trauma growing up as children. So language deprivation is a critical thing for us to keep in mind for social and psychological development and its impact. Let me share the definition. This is from the University of Rochester. And for clarification, when we talk about a person who's trying to communicate with me, and they will often say, well, tell her this and tell her that. This really comes back to this idea of the definition that I'm presenting to you here. I'm not talking about autism, and I'm not talking about neglect or discrimination. All of those things exist, and all of those things are real, and all of those things are very serious as they are faced. But language deprivation is its own issue. It's its own impact on a child's life that stays with that child for the rest of their life.
So that definition was coined about 5 years ago, and the language acquisition window for the brain is still developing. That's where roles and responsibilities and programs need to be created during that time, because once that 5-year window has closed, trying to get that part of the brain updated is not as easy. It's more difficult to take in new information and learn that new information. And we do have the research that shows these impacts. Dr. Krishnalgar has actually 2 studies regarding public health and the quality of life. The research was done through Gallaudet University. There were 1,500 adults studied who experienced language. There were 2 groups. One, as I mentioned, who were communicationally neglected, which means, let's say they were at a dinner table with their family who could hear and they were the only deaf person. They would have to rely on a family member to fill them in on what was being said around the table. However, typically that person would often tell them, I'll tell you later. And then they never actually had access to that information. They weren't able to interact with the group individually because the group was all communicating in spoken language that the child had no access to. There was no direct language access within that situation, or very little to be had. Therefore, the child is left waiting. And then once they go to school at 5, they still are only exposed to spoken language and not visual language. Once they're 13 or 14, it could happen that they learn sign language. However,
It's still happening to this day.
it's still happening to this day. So there is an impact on public health of this language deprivation. Drug addiction, heart attacks, alcoholism, cancer, these all become risk factors that have to do with the child's experience with language at 5 years old. I mean, these might not occur until they're in their 40s or 50s, but if you can imagine the long time of this persistent impact this language deprivation has on the individual. So we really need to be careful and care for our children holistically as whole beings, regarding their brain development, their physical health, their connections with others, with their family, in their educational environment, as well as out in the world. They need to be able to have access to everything. So that's something we really need to think about. So when we think about it, where exactly in the system does language deprivation happen? Is it in early intervention, in education, in adulthood? And to be honest with you, it occurs throughout a person's life. Deaf adults can still experience certain traumas. They can struggle finding employment, expressing themselves. In adulthood, that could be impacted from their language deprivation they experienced as a child. They may try to navigate life with the best approach that they have, but sometimes we even see how schools change. A teacher may instruct in spoken language too quickly. A child may have different teachers that speak at different paces, that speak at different volumes, who have different classroom environments that cause the student to struggle, and therefore they have limited access to language in their educational environment. And then early intervention, that system often does not provide ASL to families, which means the family continues to use spoken language with their child, even if the family's home language isn't even English, it could be another language. So it's very challenging throughout a person's life and within the family dynamic, and we need to do better for people so that we can have more deaf people involved. We have more allies involved. There's more respect and understanding of deaf people's roles from the time that they're babies and when they're children. That these deaf people, these deaf professionals can be brought in and collaborate with the family. And what's more, we need state agencies involve deaf people in early intervention as well. So hopefully we will see more of that coming down. I've been thrilled to see that this has been happening more. And on a state level, there's a law called LEAD K, Language Equality and Access for Deaf Kids. And I believe there are over 14 states who have passed this legislation, but currently we have complete data where the law requires states to collect data, both for ASL and for spoken English. And the results in California and Kansas were that in 2019, 70% of deaf and hard of hearing children ages 0 to 5 in the entire state did not meet language milestones. Now, remember, we talked about the high percentage of spoken English used. Now in 2020, that percentage then increased to 79% in Kansas. They did not meet their language milestones. So the numbers don't lie. There was also a study in France, interestingly enough, that looked at 27 French-speaking deaf children who had implants and found that only half of these children displayed language skills comparable to their hearing peers on the word level. But on the sentence level, they were actually below their hearing peers, less than 50% had that competency. And we expect deaf children to be on par with their peers at all levels. Whether it's hearing ability, speaking ability, sign language ability, we have to raise our expectations. We still need to look at it, take this data to the systemic level in order to help them understand that just because a student has speech ability, if you look at the juxtaposition of the numbers for deaf children, you see the picture that paints and how deaf children are being impacted. So in summary, you can see a lot of the systemic challenges we have, but we've had some triumphs as well. One being the resilience of people to be creative and find solutions, to get involved on a community level, to be engaged, to reach out to people to lobby the state level and legislature to make sure the deaf people are involved. And the result has been, we've seen an increase in the number of families who are learning sign language. There's been a lot of support in Congress and schools committing to take the step to provide sign language classes. Gallaudet University has been doing that on its level as well. So we've seen an increase there. There are also the numbers of deaf teachers that are declining. We need more deaf teachers. There was recently research done to see how many deaf people graduated from educational preparation programs and how many teachers of the deaf there were as well. And there was a great decrease in the numbers of deaf instructors, and that number needs to be brought back up. We need to get people interested in teaching, get them motivated because they're a fit for the culture. We also need Black, Indigenous people of color as instructors. We need to make sure that teachers are role models and representative of the students that they instruct. So again, we need to get those numbers up. Also, the number of deaf schools has been relatively stable. There have only been 1 or 2 closings recently, but we still have concerns about the numbers of students being entered into mainstream programs with a teacher of the deaf or with interpreters, with audiological enhancements, specialists. Now, a lot of programs have closed. I believe just 5 years ago in Philadelphia, there were 3 or 4 very large mainstream programs that shut their doors within the same year. Largely, it was due to IDEA pushing for inclusion. And that has a mixed meaning for deaf people. In the general system, inclusion means that if a student is deaf or has a disability, they are then expected to join their non-disabled peers in the classroom. And that is something that has become the norm. And now they become quote unquote normal. But with a deaf student, when they are surrounded by other deaf peers and deaf adults, that's where they feel normal. That's where they have access. That's where they have linguistic stimulation. And that's where they can really spread their wings and be themselves, as opposed to in the mainstream system. So we need more people in the educational system working on this. World Federation of the Deaf has also put out a few comments about that. We are seeing an increase as well in deaf administrators. We previously had 10 all over the country. And then as of a recent count, we have 24. There was recently an article published that there are 24 deaf administrators, which is a great uptick. Now, the numbers of students attending deaf schools and who have IEPs at deaf school, it's proportional. It's not proportional to what it was back in, say, the 70s, where about 50 to 60% of deaf students were going to schools for the deaf. It would have been 80%. Now there are more options for school for deaf students to go to. And it's important to find the best fit, which isn't always happening today. One success we've also seen is the number of organizations who are focused on education of deaf students. Also focusing on American Sign Language in schools. One other organization may focus on the school environment. Another may focus on National Deaf Conferences and sharing ideas and brainstorming the education of K through 12 students on a national level. So we're seeing multiple organizations, again, who are focusing on education for deaf students. And here are some examples of those set of organizations. We have www.deafeducation.us for the National Deaf Education Conference. It's a really great conference. It talks about education, also university research. There are a lot of great presentations, networking abilities. There's also the NAD conference. We also have ASL Connect through Gallaudet University, which focuses on the family unit. And there are a lot of great free ASL resources available. They have curricula, they have supports, they have relationships with families, and our families love that program. It's been expanding greatly. And so that's definitely a website you should reach out to. We have 2 other important organizations for language resources in ASL or in bilingual environments. You can see the 2 on the bottom. The NASLEHL, it's for K to 12 ASL curriculum. It also includes birth to 5. And then it focuses on sharing experiences. And both of these organizations on the bottom of the slide are tremendous resources. We also have that NASL ECE. They have an ASL roundtable, which I would encourage you to attend. They have ASL specialists and teachers and other professionals from the field to network with. It's really a great resource, and they have an annual conference as well. I highly recommend attending both conferences if you're interested. Now, I also have to make sure that we acknowledge Hollywood and our deaf actors. We've seen a rise in the number of deaf performers over the last few years. And there's a lot more sign language being shown than ever. It's been very powerful to see deaf people on the screen, both large and small. They're on TV programs, they're on the big screen in movie theaters, and that's become much more powerful. And it's very poignant to see sign language again on the screen. That means it has been accepted by society, which is incredible. And especially, we've seen a lot more deaf performers, deaf producers, directors, writers, and it's thanks to everyone who has made them visible and made the language visible for society. And we have to give them a lot of credit for helping sign language be brought to the fore in the entertainment environment, because that's also making more people want to learn sign language and about deaf people. So we want to thank our Hollywood performers and actors.
So we can see like tremendous opportunities. The system has improved in many, many areas, much more visibility, lots of deaf businesses, deaf organizations that have been established, a lot of growth, a lot of excitement, deaf expos, deaf cruises. So much has happened out there, so much growth, so much development in a variety of different settings all over the world. Big Fortune 500 companies as well. But the area that we still seem to struggle in is here, addressing families' concerns, bringing in families and communities, and specifically more sign language access for our families. They are craving this access. You can see the interest in deaf families and hearing families outside of these particular settings. Things are not perfect. There still is discrimination, but things have gotten better than certainly they were 20 years ago. It's a world of difference. But when we look at the educational system 20 years ago, is it also getting better? If we look at 4 or 5 different years ago and the laws that have passed, things are better. There is access to sign language. There are more connections and referrals that are happening, even when doctors really don't know how to refer families. These are things that need to change now. We need to figure out, where is the weakness in the system? So let me throw this out here. Is it a deaf issue or is it a language issue? Is this something that we're putting on deaf people, or are we putting it on others? I'm going to show you a short video from my grad students that they have developed from a Gallaudet, and it's about gene editing. I don't have enough time to show you the whole thing. I'll show you part of it. It doesn't seem to be working. I can tell you briefly what it talks about. It talks about gene editing and the scientific process of deciding how to edit the genes, specifically edit out possibly deaf genes. There are about 40 to 60% of deaf people are deaf because of genetic reasons. Mm-hmm. And if those were removed, we would no longer have people born deaf. We would have less deaf people on Earth if there were gene editing. And that's something for us to really think about carefully. So these are the issues we want to look at when we talk about language deprivation and access. It comes down to these 3 areas of need. The first is knowledge, skills, and then advocacy. We have to look at our own history, look at the work that our community has done, look at other perspectives, look at other stories and points of view, look at study systems in place and understand why those belief systems are there, why those values are the way that they are. Look at our own competencies and to develop our own resources. We want to reach out and collaborate with different organizations, different communities, and then advocate. Get out there and do it. Push back for change, lobby for change, educate people, take back your own power. And then it really comes down to data, statistics, and research. I strongly encourage investment into those statistics, into being able to see and document the evidence that we have to further our discussion and bring that into our communities. Again, to reframe this, it is not us against them. That is not where our fight exists. It's a global issue. We have one researcher from Denmark who noted that when those numbers of people using language decline, you will also see the impact on different species of animals decline. Endangered animals are impacted by the decline of language usage. It's a danger to all of us. On a biological level, you can see biodiversity is very important in the way that we are addressing things in society, different situations, that deaf people have so much to bring, so much to offer, even when we're looking at iPads and touch screens. Gallaudet University is also bringing in consultants for deaf people to figure out how to use these different technologies and bring different ways of looking things to the greater public. We have so much to offer globally as well. All the different changes. Climate change is something important to us as well. We want to make sure that we continue diversity, and there are a lot of impacts on diversity because of climate change that concern us as well. So with knowledge, skills, and advocacy, with inclusion as well, I'm sure that we will be able to improve these systems, find the flaws, and remove any language deprivation moving forward. Specifically, we need to keep our eye on this new threat of gene editing. Something that science is working on that needs to be looked at very, very closely and carefully, and we need to be a part of those conversations. We need to be a part of those conversations on how it will impact the deaf community and ourselves. We need to be there at the table. Here are my list of references for your interest. So as long as we have deaf people on earth, we will have signs. A very famous quote from our previous president of NAD, George Betitz. And we stand by that quote. I hope that you do too. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for such a wonderful and informative presentation, looking at where we are and how we can look for different resources. It's such a fantastic presentation. Thank you. So I see that we have a few questions. I would like to remind people that if you use the Q&A function to ask your questions, I will then moderate. And if you would like to use the raise your hand feature to ask a question, we can call on you when it's time. And just as a reminder, if you want to use spoken English, just wait a moment for the interpreters to be spotlit. Okay, thank you so much. I see the first question we have, and it says the 3 votes that prevented ratification of the UNCRPD by the US Congress were because of objections from homeschool lobbyists. What has homeschooling had to do with the ratification of conventions, and what would advance the equality of life for deaf people?
Yes, there were 3 votes to ratify 2 administrations ago, I believe, under President Obama, his term. Yes, the homeschooling argument is completely irrational from my point of view. But yes, they did make a very strong and impassioned argument. It seems they are referring to the part of children with disabilities needing to be in classroom settings with a qualified teacher and have opportunities to socialize with their peers. That's where they're going, but it doesn't really apply to a high percent of children with disabilities regardless. So I think that they jumped to that conclusion that somehow it would be dangerous for students and that they couldn't utilize that. So it's irrational. Obviously, those students also can have homeschooling. They also have access to homeschooling as an option. So that argument is invalid, but regardless, that was the argument that was made at the time.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I see several questions. I'm going to call on Roz. I see a hand raised. Can we spotlight the person with the hand raised feature, please? Tony's saying we may need to promote her to a panelist in order to get her spotlit. Okay, that's being worked on currently. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for the spotlight, let's move on to the second question. It says pertaining to social stigma. So if sign language was ratified and recognized as a language, is that related to people stigmatizing sign language, or would it reduce that stigma if the ratification occurred?
I would say yes. I would say yes, because once the United States government and their legislative body, 463 senators, all the representatives would validate and vote, I think that would have a tremendous influence on people in a variety of states to demonstrate and say, yes, they have that support for language recognition. And I think that would be inspiring. And it would improve our legal system, for sure. And we would no longer marginalize our language.
Okay, it looks like the one hand was taken down and someone else has their hand up to be promoted. Sadie, I believe. Let's see if we can get you promoted so you can be spotlit. Will you be using spoken English or sign? I'll be signing, just give me 1 second. Okay, first of all, thank you for your presentation and for all the information you shared with us this evening. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Sadie.
Nice to meet you as well.
So you talked about federal and state policies, as well as funding. There is no funding for individual teachers and schools
And
local communities. There isn't that support for students because they aren't trained to support students, or deaf students rather.
Right, great question. That's where advocacy and allyship really come into play. As individuals, every individual is completely different. They bring in different trainings, different experiences, professional development, curriculums, different narratives, different research, things that we might not have been exposed to in our own lives.
Right.
So it's really important for them to be there for their own child, to be able to really communicate and engage with their child richly, to be involved with a variety of organizations, take them camping, help them come out and meet different deaf adults, deaf peers, have those interpersonal connections, to find ways to engage in school trips or engage with reading and different stories where they can see themselves in those stories.
Right.
Those small activities and those larger activities, of course, IEP meetings as well, and 504 planning, ADA accessibility, all of those will impact access and all have to be a part of that. For IDEA, for example, requires best practice and research and statistics to be a part of that conversation for the success of deaf children. So you can become an ally or an advocate, regardless of that community, working with a young child, working with the family to help give them additional information that they may not have access to, or to the school system, administration, different organizations. There are many ways to advocate. Even if the law is not in place, we still have work to do what's right, what feels important and right.
Right. Thank you for your time again.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good luck.
I see another question from Rihanna
Rihanna.
Vargas. Do you want to pull up your video? Great, thank you. Hello,
Hi there.
it's nice to see you. I actually have a few questions for you. So you mentioned that states all over the country require that deaf mentor program. So how do those states, or how will they keep track of the process, their progress? Who is responsible for that? Because, sometimes laws get passed, but then at the same time, they're not enforced until much later on down the line. So who controls that? And also, how will it be run to make sure that it actually happens?
Yeah, several deaf people have asked me that question. Yes. How do we make sure that they follow through? We celebrate a law being passed, but then how do we make sure that it's enacted? And my answer to that is they talk about specific procedures in place that have to be followed compared to other laws. So as it would apply to HRDA, the Health HRSA, Health Resource Services Administration. With maternal child borough, and that's under HHS, Health and Human Services Department, under the US government. And all the way down the line is a specific unit of federal employees who are responsible to monitor the EDI system. It's a very small group of employees, probably 4 or 5 people. And they are charged with looking at different systems. The state has them fill out a plan about what is the deaf program going to look like and how are you going to engage families? Where is the money going to come from? How will the money be used? All of this has to be noted in the plan for a grant, if you will. And then it is submitted, I believe August 2019 was submitted to that department, who would oversee the plan and determine which states would receive which monies. And 2 or 3 of them will compete. Different organizations will apply. A School for the Deaf will apply. The state health department, for example, could also apply, or a variety of different organizations and states. So it's really comes from that particular department of how that's run. Once it is approved and the monies are given, I believe the last time I remember it was $250,000 a year for 4 years. So then the state takes on the responsibility from that year forward until March 31st, 2024. They have to demonstrate 10% of families have had access to deaf mentors as a result of the program. So they will have to demonstrate
Program of some kind.
and have a program of some kind. It has been a struggle for some states who haven't for a long time, but we would say go ahead, ask for help, ask for any allyship, collaborate, cooperate, but really encourage them to check in and develop those stronger systems with that intention in mind.
Okay, thank you. And then also for statistics, you mentioned how many deaf children currently are in schools for the deaf. What was that percentage again?
8.
8.
It's really 8.1%, right, of all deaf children with IEPs.
Okay, so they have IEPs. And then I know you said historically that's changed, but right now, all over the United States, how many deaf children are actually attending deaf schools percentage-wise?
Well, from 400,000 deaf and hard of hearing students, it's calculated, they say about 400,000. That number really declines to about 2%,
Okay,
about 2%, about 5,000 children. if I
Wow.
remember correctly.
Okay.
It's about 5,000, something like that, if my calculation is correct, from another speaker. That other speaker has more specific statistics. If you're interested offline, I'd be happy to share that with you or answer any other questions that you might have.
Oh, please do.
I know we always have good conversations.
Okay, and then we'll be able to have an access to access to a copy of the PowerPoint after your presentation?
I refer that to Jamie. I'm happy to provide it.
I'm following you. If you want me to share them, I certainly can. And then this might be a little off topic, but I was wondering if we could just set up a meeting between the two of us.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You know how to reach me.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks. Okay, I think we have another question in the Q&A. Obviously, we've been dealing with COVID situation for a few years now, and people are staying home with their parents. Has that had an impact on language acquisition and deprivation?
Oh, I'm sure it has. I mean, right now, so far, there's only been one study on the topic that has seen the NIH funding University of Health Fund, the National Institute of Health. They had funded one study studying how families interact with their deaf children, but because of COVID, they asked for special permission to change the study. And it's interesting that they have found that the biggest challenge for families of deaf children is hearing aid assistance. With schools closed, how do they get free batteries? And that's been a real issue, is getting access to hearing aid batteries with schools closed. So there have been a couple of researchers out there doing the work right now, getting out there and interviewing, asking for grants, looking at those social and emotional costs, those experiences, what's happening with language development. And it should be coming in soon, seeing those scores by the end of the year, I would assume. I think that a lot of assessments have been on hold for the last 2 years. Everything has really been held up. Testing has not been able to continue, research and data has not been able to be collected. So this season, I think we should be able to have a lot more information available by spring, would be my guess.
Thank you. Okay, Igor, we're going to promote you to ask your question. Hi, my name is Igor and I'm from Philadelphia. And I support deaf kids. So my question is, as far as schools, have all schools, well, I should say, let's say you said Spanish and French are the other most studied languages. And what about American Sign Language? Doesn't seem that a lot of programs have American Sign Language. My daughter, for example, when she went to college, she wanted to learn ASL. She already has signing skills and she wanted to enhance those skills. And she really wanted to be able to learn more ASL at college, but she wasn't able to because they simply didn't have a program. So that's something we'd like to see, is that more courses are available.
Sure. I think there was a count about 200 colleges and universities do provide ASL classes or courses. They do have some type of instruction, about 200. I'm not sure how many in the United States, but you're asking where?
No, I'm talking about just schools, for example, high schools, middle schools. That's what I'm looking at specifically, not necessarily college.
I see. So middle schools and high schools, about the same. Those numbers are increasing, but you are right. Colleges are certainly not requiring that. It's not something that they want to see in
They
place.
might wait for students.
They
to
might
ask
wait
it
for
before they
students
offer
to
it.
ask for it before they offer it. But we have other deaf adults and CODAs who are writing letters to the school boards, specifically getting signatures from students to demonstrate interest and submitting that to the schools, which will light a fire under them and help them to consider establishing those programs. That's a possibility. To reach out, they have to be asked sometimes. Sometimes colleges are just moving along status quo. They have to follow the state curriculum, state standards, which nowhere says anything about ASL, but sometimes you can go around through the State Department and find other ways to get those classes in place on that college level.
Right. I've already asked the school district. I've had discussions with them so far and I've sent
Good.
messages to them. But that's just a first step in trying to get that enacted. And then secondly, as far as the news on television, having interpreters now in the boxes on screen, There are some places that don't have it. They might have caption, but for kids in school who are learning, they go home and they're isolated because their parents here, they use spoken language, the kids don't have access to that. So it's nice to see, why isn't there more of that happening on television so children can have access to that on the screen?
I completely agree. I've been a long time advocate for captioning, yes, but captioning does not fit all people. Some people really don't benefit from captioning and they need ASL. We need to push back harder, specifically during COVID. If you watch the news, there's so much information about COVID, and all 50 states finally are providing access in American Sign Language, but we don't want that to disappear. We need to continue to lobby them and put pressure on news sources, on news stations, all of the different news stations, to say, please continue to offer ASL access, and then they will add it. Or you can go to the government, different government speakers, when they come on stage, need to be near the interpreter so that they're both in the same frame. But we need more government officials to be willing to work closely with ASL interpreters. But those news sources really need a lot of pressure, meetings, petitions. We need a lot more lobbying and a lot more pressure on those news sources. It really depends on you on a local level to watch it, because once they see which channels you're watching, if that's the channel with ASL accommodations, then they're going to be more willing to provide it. But it really comes down to pressure. No law will do that. Lawsuits could give them the pressure that they're looking for.
And even cable, I mean, what am I paying for cable for when there's no interpreters available on
Excellent point.
those outlets?
Good
I
argument.
think I had one more question for you. Let me check my notes. Oh, okay. So as far as communication access, it's not always great. There are half the places that won't provide interpreters. They might not have qualified interpreters. Everyone should have qualified interpreters, but it all comes down to money at the end of the day. They don't want to provide interpreters because they don't want to have to pay for it. So is that something the government could subsidize? Maybe they could pay a certain percentage and then that would force those entities to provide interpreters. And that way it would be a more seamless process. What do you think?
There are several countries out there in Australia, in Belgium, who are doing that. I believe France as well has moved in that direction. It's really about how that money comes down from the top, and people who are making the decisions about what they're going to fund, specifically interpreters. So there are studies in Australia and French and France and Belgium that I think you could bring to the United States. I would be
Right.
happy to see that and help to lead that type of work. I would completely support that.
Right. There are a lot of television stations in Europe that will provide interpretation services, but here in the States, I mean, they did do it a long time ago. You would have the little interpreter in the box on your screen, but then it went away. Then came captions. And some people have better access, captions are enough for some people, but there are other people who prefer to access information in American Sign Language. And also, even sometimes the way CART is used, they think that's a perfect substitute for interpreters, but we really need to have access to visual communication. It's very helpful just to have those options both available.
Great points, great points.
Thank you,
you.
Igor.
Thank you for your comments.
I think I had one more as well, but well, Jamie's saying we actually have to move on to our next question. Oh, all right, sure thing. Thank you though, Igor, appreciate it. Okay, I see a student, Christina Kim, has moved up in the queue. Okay, she should be promoted soon. Nope, didn't work. Are we going to be able to spotlight her? Trying again? Okay, here it comes.
And I can see that there are some questions typed in the Q&A as well.
Right. Are you planning to use spoken English or are you going to sign? Christina, are you all set? Okay, we're actually just going to move on to the next question. Okay. I see there's one person who just reached out to me, but I'll be with you in one moment. Okay, I'm going to leave that for now. So someone says, hello, Tawny. You had those statistics from California and Kansas about Lead K. Do you have any, are there any accommodations or changes that could apply for future bills that are brought forward in order to apply to new bills that haven't really gone forward with Lead K? Are there any recommendations or suggestions that you can make about that?
Sure. The Deaf Studies graduate program at Gallaudet has done a deep dive into this area, Lead K applications in a variety of states where they've passed. And their findings are very, very interesting, and they will be published very soon. I can give you a couple of hints about where they're going, but more specifics, I would lead you to that program. Those advisors can give you more specific information, specifically the team on Lead K. But what I can tell you at this time, the most important thing is to make sure the deaf agency and the commission, the deaf commissions are heavily involved. That's really important as part of the task force. 51% needs to be a part of that task force. And that, so they can create clear expectations. And that's what we've seen so far. The patterns of effective task force in the system through the states.
Thank you. So we have one more question plus one more comment. The question is, you already talked about this a little bit, but as a hearing person, how can I best support deaf people and promote their views from an outsider's perspective? Because I have hearing privilege being an ASL student in college. How then can I best support deaf people?
I'm thinking of three things.
Stand aside.
Stand aside. I'm not asking you to leave, stay, but just stand aside. Make space for the deaf person. Let them lead. Let them be the leader. And elevate. Elevate means if there is an opportunity that will use your experience and you have privilege, that's fine. Use your privilege to elevate in any role that you happen to be a part of using ASL, in the way that you talk to people and the way that you show respect. So stand aside, elevate, give opportunities for deaf people to take the lead. And that will promote change.
Cool. And this will be our last comment from someone who says, this is a comment, not a question, but I just wanted to thank you, Tawny, so much for your presentation. It was very helpful for understanding these ideas and statistics. So thank you for sharing that with us.
It's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
And from myself, Jamie, thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. We all learned so much from you. So thank you.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you for coming out.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you for your involvement.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.